I stood at the top of the world, gazing down from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office. The city below was mine. I'd earned it, built it, and controlled it. Every deal, every acquisition, every victory had led me here. Robert Ackerman, the untouchable king of a vast empire, feared and respected by all. My life was a symphony of success, played to the tune of wealth, power, and influence. But power does strange things to a man. It had turned me cold, detached. Empathy was for the weak, I often told myself. Compassion? A luxury for those who couldn't afford to win. I took pride in the fear I instilled, the way my employees cowered when I walked into the room, the way competitors faltered at the mere mention of my name. Weakness was something to be crushed, not indulged. Yet, in my blind pursuit of power, I failed to see the cracks forming beneath my feet. The day started like any other, a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and high-stakes negotiations. I was on the verge of closing a multi-million-dollar deal that would solidify my dominance in the market. My best friend, Paul, and my brother, David, both high-ranking executives in my company, had assured me that everything was in place. My wife, Cynthia, had promised to host a celebratory dinner that evening at our mansion. Life, as usual, was perfect. But by noon, the first blow came. The deal I had been counting on fell apart in an instant. The investors backed out, citing unforeseen complications. I was furious. I called Paul into my office, demanding an explanation. He seemed nervous, uncharacteristically so, but assured me it was just a minor setback. A minor setback, he called it. But my instincts told me otherwise. By the time I arrived home that evening, my frustration had grown into a simmering rage. I found Cynthia in our opulent living room, sipping a glass of wine. She barely looked up as I entered. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tense. She shrugged, her eyes avoiding mine. "I don't know, Robert. Maybe you're losing your touch." I froze. Her words, so casually spoken, cut deeper than any insult I'd ever faced in the boardroom. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Cynthia stood, smoothing her dress. That must be David. My brother entered, flanked by two men in dark suits. They didn't look like business associates. My heart sank. "What's going on here?" I demanded. David met my gaze with a look I had never seen before, pity. "Robert, there's something you need to know." And then it all unraveled. Paul, David, Cynthia, they had been conspiring against me for months. The deal that fell through? It was a setup, orchestrated by them and funded by investors I thought were loyal. My own father, who I believed had died years ago, was revealed as the mastermind behind the entire scheme. He had faked his death to teach me a lesson, to bring me down from the pedestal I had built for myself. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the world shift beneath my feet as I processed the betrayal. My wealth, my power, my empire, all gone in a matter of hours. I had been so blinded by arrogance that I never saw it coming. My own family had turned against me, and for what? To teach me humility? "I trusted you," I whispered, my voice breaking. But the only response I received was silence. They left me there, alone in the mansion that now felt more like a prison. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was nothing compared to the devastation that followed. By the end of the night, my bank accounts were frozen, my assets seized, and my reputation shattered. I had lost everything. The days that followed were a blur. The media had a field day with my downfall, plastering my face on every newspaper, mocking my demise. The once revered Robert Ackerman had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of greed and hubris. My friends vanished, my employees distanced themselves, and even those who once feared me now reveled in my ruin. I wandered the city streets, the very streets I once looked down upon, now foreign and unwelcoming. My expensive suits and polished shoes were out of place here. I was out of place. It was on one of these aimless walks that I found myself in a rundown part of town, far from the glittering towers of my former empire. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness within me. As I turned a corner, I nearly collided with a woman carrying a bag of groceries. The contents spilled onto the pavement, and I instinctively bent down to help her, a reflex I hadn't exercised in years. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. She was older, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that made her seem out of place in such a rough neighborhood. "You look like you could use a hot meal." I stared at her, stunned. It had been so long since anyone had shown me kindness without expecting something in return. Before I could respond, she smiled and nodded toward a small, modest house down the street. "I'm Caroline. Why don't you come inside? You look like you could use some company too." I followed her, too exhausted to argue. The house was simple, nothing like the palatial mansion I had once called home, but it was warm and inviting. Caroline said about preparing a meal, and for the first time in days, I felt a small semblance of peace. Over dinner, she didn't pry into my past or ask uncomfortable questions. Instead, she shared stories of her life, her late husband, and the community she cared for. There was something in her words, a quiet strength and contentment, that made me realize how hollow my own life had been. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself returning to Caroline's house. She took me in, no questions asked, and in her, I found something I didn't know I was missing: compassion. She taught me to live simply, to appreciate the small things I had once overlooked. Together, we volunteered at a local shelter, helping those less fortunate, people I had once disregarded as beneath me. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to see the world differently. The anger and bitterness I had clung to for so long started to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose I had never known. Caroline's kindness was a balm to my wounded soul, and in her small acts of generosity, I found healing. But it wasn't just Caroline's influence that changed me. It was the realization that my fall from grace was more than just a punishment, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild, not my wealth or my empire, but myself. And just when I thought I was beginning to find my way, life threw another curveball. One evening, as Caroline and I sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me with a serious expression. "Robert, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I've been hearing rumors. Something about your past. People are talking, and it's not good." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What are they saying?" She hesitated, then continued, "There are whispers that your downfall wasn't just about teaching you a lesson. There might be more to it, something darker. I think you need to find out the truth, for your own sake." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I had thought I had reached the bottom, but now it seemed there was more beneath the surface, secrets and lies that had yet to be uncovered. The thought terrified me, but it also sparked a new determination within me. I wasn't just a victim of my arrogance, I had been played, manipulated by those closest to me. And now, it was time to uncover the full extent of their betrayal. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a small, nondescript building on the edge of town. The sign above the door read McGregor and Associates, Private Investigators. Caroline had suggested I speak to a detective, someone who could help me dig deeper into the events leading up to my downfall. Reluctantly, I had agreed. If there were more secrets to be uncovered, I needed to know. The inside of the office was just as modest as the exterior. A man in his 50s, with a grizzled beard and a no-nonsense attitude, greeted me. "Name's McGregor." Caroline called ahead. "Said you needed help." I nodded, taking a seat across from his cluttered desk. "I need to know the truth about what happened to me, why my father, my brother, and my wife turned against me. There's something more to this, something I'm missing." McGregor leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You sure you're ready for what you might find?" "Whatever it is," I replied, "I need to know." Over the next few weeks, McGregor and I worked together to uncover the truth. He had connections, sources willing to talk, and a knack for finding information that others might miss. Slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle started to come together. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. My father's involvement wasn't just about teaching me a lesson, it was about power. He had never intended to simply humble me, he wanted to destroy me completely, to reclaim the empire he had built and that I had taken over. My brother and Paul had been his pawns, manipulated with promises of wealth and power once I was out of the picture. But the most shocking revelation came from Cynthia. I had always believed that she had married me for my wealth and status, but the truth was far more sinister. She had been working with my father from the beginning, using our marriage as a means to gain access to my fortune. The love I thought we shared was nothing but a facade, a cruel joke at my expense. When McGregor laid the final piece of evidence on the table, a recording of a conversation between Cynthia and my father, discussing how they would divide my assets, I felt my world crumble once more. But this time, the pain was different. It wasn't the pain of loss or betrayal, it was the pain of understanding. I had been a fool, blinded by my arrogance and greed, unable to see the truth right in front of me. I had surrounded myself with people who only cared about what they could take from me, and in doing so, I had lost sight of who I truly was. But now, I had a choice. I could let this new revelation destroy me, or I could use it to finally become the man I wanted to be, the man Caroline had shown me I could be. That evening, I returned to Caroline's house. She was waiting for me on the porch, her eyes full of concern. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. "I did. And now, I know what I need to do." With Caroline's support, I began to rebuild my life, not with the goal of reclaiming my lost wealth, but with the goal of making a difference. I used the last of my resources to start a social project aimed at helping at-risk youth, giving them the opportunities I had once taken for granted. I worked tirelessly, not for personal gain, but to make amends for the harm I had caused in my past. Word of my efforts spread, and soon, the community I had once looked down upon began to see me not as the ruthless businessman I had been, but as someone who had finally learned the value of empathy and humility. In the end, it wasn't the money or the power that defined me, it was the people I helped, the lives I touched, and the man I had become. And as I stood on the stage at the opening of a new youth center, surrounded by the smiling faces of those I had helped, I finally understood what true success meant. It wasn't about what I had gained, but about what I had given. And in that moment, I knew that despite everything I had lost, I had found something far more valuable, myself. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.